working with Knockout? Yeah, hands went down real quick, didn't they? Who here loves working with React? Okay. All right. I'm going to convince you that maybe you will love something else better, but let's just go with it. So one of the things that we did as a development community, and like this wasn't me, but somebody out there, I think it was Microsoft, decided that we needed a better way to write JavaScript because it doesn't have typing. Like I can't type my variables, and it didn't do a lot of the things that I would expect it to do, and it wasn't compatible. I'd write JavaScript one way, and I don't want to name browsers by name, but one that rhymes with Internet Explorer and Edge, they suck because they're not compatible with anything. And TypeScript kind of helped us fix that. And I didn't make this up. I took this information off of the interwebs. TypeScript claims to be both functional and object-oriented at the same time, which to me is magic. I don't know about you, but to me, that's a very magic thing, and I don't believe in magic anymore. But essentially, TypeScript is JavaScript, just more of it. Syntactical sugar, we got some tools, but I'm still writing JavaScript. Hey, welcome, Walter. Doing the things I hate. So then we have our hero, React. React is going to save us, right? You love React. Everybody loves React. But React claims to be a JavaScript library. It's really still JavaScript. And not only that, but we get all these new fun little things. We get Redux. We get JSX. We get props. Or maybe we don't get props. I don't know if we have props anymore. Do we have props? Kind of, sort of. Not the same way it used to be why? Because it was too heavy. So really React is just JavaScript, the thing that most of us don't love, and more of it. Redux. We have Redux. So Redux allows us to manage state in React. That has to be the right way. But I found something interesting when researching Redux, and that was the guy who actually wrote Redux or invented Redux patterned it after something else called Elm. And so I thought, maybe there's a better way. And I thought, okay, so this is actually on the redux.org website, and you can read through it, and he makes this wonderful statement, but then the solution that he proposes is not that we use Elm, it's that we adopt React, Redux, Immutable, Flow, Flux, like 100 other different wrappers to our JavaScript and our stack so that we can do more, so that we can work more like Elm. But wait a second. What's this Elm thing again? Anybody here worked with Elm? Okay. Good, fresh ears. So Elm is a functional programming language. It is not a framework. It is not a library. It is its own programming language, and it compiles to JavaScript. And it compiles to a very low-level JavaScript, which increases the compatibility. Anybody ever write JavaScript that generates runtime exceptions? Wow, you guys are good. You guys are really good, because everybody I know, in fact, every time I've looked at JavaScript that somebody has written, whether it's an extension or a theme or something else, I can cause runtime exceptions. I can almost guarantee you every single time, and it doesn't take me very long. So hats off to you guys who have no runtime exceptions. Good for you. But there is kind of a better way with Elm. So Elm really is what React and Redux was based on, because they liked the way it worked, and there were a lot of things it does right. And When you look at that stack that I pointed out earlier, that crazy multicolored pyramid, all of those things are really built into Elm. In fact, when you start working with Elm and you're in the sandbox mode, you only need to install Elm to get Elm to work and to actually view something on your browser and to debug and to write code and to create all your logic within Elm. It includes what we would call NPM. It has a package manager. Webpack is built in. It's called Elm Reactor. Elm Reactor does what Webpack does. Now, there's one exception to this because you guys are going to call BS on me in just a minute. When you are working with Elm and only taking over a part of the DOM, then you need to pass information back into JavaScript. Technically, I can still do that with Reactor, but I like to use Webpack. It makes things just a little bit easier for me, but you don't have to. It is extremely reactive, and I'm going to show you a demo of just a little thing I wrote here for this conference in a minute. It has state management. Elm is state management. You cannot write Elm without properly managing state. It will not allow you. TypeScript. Elm is a functional language. It is immutable, so all of your variables are immutable, and they are strongly typed. And if you do not type something properly, and if you do not account for a case, Elm will tell you. Going back to our slide before, if you can compile it, it will run. And it has a really nice, friendly compiler. So Elm is built for web apps. It is an architecture, the programming language is built to create front-end web apps. And it's based on really three basic things. So those of you who are used to working in React, you have a model. Your model is your state. You have a view, which is kind of like a template, but it's much better than a template. In fact, when I'm working in Elm, I do not have to write any HTML. Come on up, guys. I do not have to write any HTML. I don't have to write any JavaScript. Elm handles all of that for me. It creates the DOM itself. And then update is anytime there's an event that is going to cause an update in state, that I have one function that updates everything. And that function is entirely visible, and it's extremely easy to program for. But even though I have it small down here, this message is the first-class citizen in Elm. Everything in Elm is based on a message. So messages are passed back and forth to each other. Once you get working in Elm, one of the main concepts that you're going to learn is that in Elm, everything is a function, no objects. Everything is a function, and that function takes one argument, which allows me to do some really, really amazing things with function. Anybody here worked in Haskell? So Elm's based on Haskell. We're in the functional programming world here. So going back to that compiler statement, this is actual output from the Elm compiler. In fact, this is what you will see in your browser if you're running Elm Reactor and just working on your code. It's extremely helpful. This is one of the easiest ones to understand, but it's telling me that I'm trying to produce the wrong kind of a data type. Has anybody ever done this? Where you encode something to send to the server and you have the wrong data type in JavaScript, and you submit your request to your endpoint on Magento, and it comes back, and what does it tell you? It tells you you have an invalid form key, which is worthless. Has anybody seen that error? It's worthless, right? But Elm will get you to that state where you're sending the right information beforehand if you set up your typing properly. couple of other things about Elm that are much better. So first of all, Elm clocks in about twice as fast as React. And we'll take a look at, I'm running it on a slow machine, on a crappy server. We'll take a look at this. The other thing that's nice to know is I can produce an Elm application in about a third to a fourth the amount of JavaScript. So this is great when you're working with mobile devices, right? And one of the main reasons for this is I don't have a framework. I'm actually compiling my Elm code to JavaScript. Everything is in one file. I don't have to reference any external crap. Everything is in one file. So going back to the messaging, anybody here love callbacks? So everybody hated callbacks initially, right? So we went to promises. Everybody here, but promises weren't good enough. So we went to what? We went to async and await, right? Everybody here use async and await right now. If you're using React, you're using a lot of async and await because you're communicating with the server. So if I think about comparing the way JavaScript communicates, it asks for some data. Maybe it gets a promise back, right? Or information. Hey, I got your request. I'll serve up some information. JavaScript says, I'll await that. You get data, but then JavaScript hangs up the phone. It's done. And the cloud's like, hey, I got more for you and a little bit more for you. And JavaScript's not there anymore. It's dropping your text left and right. Elm works a little differently. So Elm, when it came on the same page, through a system called ports. And going back to our messages, it works much more like a messaging queue. In fact, it is a messaging queue rather than these asynchronous functions that we're used to working to in JavaScript. And why is that? Well, that's because if I write a program in JavaScript that is waiting for information and I screw up my timing, right? And I don't have that information back yet, JavaScript hates me, right? It creates one of those runtime errors that none of you have by admission in this group. Whereas Elm is more than happy to work with a messaging system rather than this sort of promises or callbacks or whatever we're using now. So it'll take data from the cloud. It'll take data from other pieces of JavaScript. It'll take data from the page. It doesn't care. When it's interested in the message, when it needs to do something with it, you just set Elm up and say, hey, deal with this message, and here's how you deal with it. So let's get to my quick demo, and I'm going to show you some of the code. This code, this is not complete. This was done for this conference. It does work. And the structure is there. This was really meant for you to have something to download and play with it. So it's got some defects in it, but it does run and it compiles in Elm. The other thing I would note is that, like, if you want to contribute to this, go to the Razoyo GitHub, and you'll see there's only one Magento Elm repository on there. Check into it, check it out, load it on your machine, load Elm, and run it, and you'll see what it does. So. Sorry. So from the front end, does anybody know what the my account address manager looks like in Magento? Like, do I need to go through a plain vanilla one? Everybody knows that, what it looks like more or less, right? You remember there are two issues that we wanted to deal with, and we chose this element because really it seems to be an orphaned child of Magento UX in general, at least in the Luma theme, because I have to reload the page every time I want to do something with an address, right? I want to delete an address, I want to add an address, I want to edit an address, I want to change an address to my default billing, my default shipping. constantly reloading that page. It's not a great user experience. It's not horrible, but it was one that was ripe for improvement. So I've set this up. I apologize for not logging in earlier. We'll see if this goes in. Okay. Sure. Everybody knows Veronica's password, right? So we're cool. All right, so let's go to Veronica's account and take a look at her. So this is, I haven't messed with anything on here. There's no Elm on this page at all. What I did was I chose that when you go to address book to take over the address manager from this page. And you'll notice one thing about it, like I won't go through all the steps. You can do this. You just go to paul.razoyo.com. You can play with it if you want. But when I want to add a new address, I don't have to reload the page. I added some features here that are really kind of still under development, but they show you the possibility of Elm. So I only ship to the US and Canada in this store. Depending on which I choose, I'm either going to have a state or a province that I populate. When I want to ship something to Texas, it automatically finds it, populates it for me. I hate drop downs. It's when there's more than like 5 choices. So I kind of chose to use this search. I could do more, with this drop down. This is really just an early idea. You can't create the address yet because we haven't met all the requirements for it. So my create address button, as you saw, as soon as I had a field, all my fields were complete. This is really simple to do in Elm. When I lose one of my fields, I go back and edit it, I lose my create address button. And again, like I could highlight these fields in red. I just did this to give you a basic idea of what it looks like. And now my new address is like already in it's in my address book. That's it. Now, it may or may not have saved on Magento yet. I don't really care. If I reload the page, I can reload, it'll show me if it's there or not yet. But it goes on the front end and it says, hey, Magento, this address was edited. Please update the damn thing for me. But whenever you want, and then it takes care of it. So if when I reload the page, the Elm is reloading, and yeah, it's shown up there. So the other things that are relatively easy to do with it are just remove addresses. It's very responsive, what you would expect from React, right? But this entire manager application, when I compress it in Elm and I deploy it, it's about 100K to do this. And and that is me writing Elm that is meant to be widely accessible and not Elm code that is meant to be the most terse possible. Like I really wanted to make it easy to read. So I can actually compress this down to probably about 50K to do the entire address manager app in here. So what does this look like? So this is what Elm looks like. You have some modules that we use, and but you can see everything is type declared. Everything is type declared. This is a custom type. I don't use objects in Elm. You'll start to recognize why objects, the way that JavaScript uses them, are inefficient when you start working in Elm. So basically, this is my, go ahead.
And bunch of spaces and array in between. What does that do?
Good question. So her question was, what does this do right here? And this is just creating my my first address within Elm. So I've defined address in another part of my code. In fact, you can see here, this is where I've defined my address type. It's my custom type. And when I want to create a new address, I just need to feed it the data that it's asking for in order. So pretty much everything's a string initially, except for my default shipping and my default billing, which are Booleans, right? So this just creates a new one of these, but this is a function. This is not new like JavaScript, like new. I'm not creating an object. I have no objects. Bad, no objects. It's functional. This is a function. This function returns a new address. That's all it. Yes, I'm initializing it. So, and I'm using it right here. So I create this editing address so that when I switch to the editing screen, I have an address. I could update the address directly, but I felt like that was a bit of a cowboy move. I didn't want to do that because I may need to cancel what I'm doing. So I'm just creating this temporary editing address. When I'm done editing and you saw me hit the submit button, it copies that into my Elm model, my dictionary of addresses, and tells Magento to update that address that I'm editing with that. And it also allows me to use the same editor for editing and creating new addresses in the system, because all I have to do is feed the editor a new address, which I've already defined, and it's got a blank slate to work from, right? In fact, I'm just copying into my editing address here the address that I had that I wanted to edit. Okay. So looking forward, this is everything this application does is right here. You get a piece of Elm code that you're not familiar with and you want to find out what it does and you want to work on it, everything it does is right here. And if you use good, variable naming, it's going to be obvious what's done. And this is my update function. So when I have an event in my view, in this case in my view, but there are other kinds of events. It could be a message coming in from a JavaScript port. It could be a message coming back from the server. Anytime there's a new message, it fires this update function. The update function takes a message, which is, these are the only messages it takes. Some of these messages require inputs. Some of them don't. But when a message comes through, it fires the update function. The update function just addresses all the cases of that message. Once it addresses the cases of that message, each case is handled separately. And it returns a model and a command. So if I don't change the model at all, for example, like I haven't built this part out yet, but I still wanted to have it in there as a placeholder, I just returned the model and I returned no command. Here, when I'm loading addresses, I need to update the model in a couple of places. One is a UI status. I'm changing to edit. Okay. And then my editing address, I'm pulling in the address. I'm just looking it up. And then I'm not returning a command. But here, when I'm removing an address, my command goes out to Magento, to its endpoint, and it says, hey, remove this address. So actually, I'll just stop here. We can take questions. Any other questions?
Elm has some kind of mobile support like React Native,
Does it have what?
like a mobile library like React Native.
Yes. So when I'm writing, it does have mobile support, but it's writing JavaScript. So you actually, it's sort of reactive by nature, by design. I use a module that is reactive. But for example, if you want to use like Bootstrap to style your Elm element,
Yeah, but I mean,
you can use it.
mobile components. Is there a framework for using native mobile components, or is it only web views?
You mean within Magento, or are you just talking in general?
In Elm.
In Elm. Yeah. So yes, you can import other components from other systems if you want to use it, but you don't need that to make it reactive. You can use web components, for example, with Elm, if you want to use paper or something like that. You have a lot of options. That's a long conversation. Short answer is yes. Anybody else?
The templating, where is the templates?
No templates.
All right, so how do you, let's say you want to add a class to your buttons, which I find that they look like buttons, or they act like buttons, so you hover over, you have a text icon.
Yeah.
How do you go back and say, hey, I want to add a class to show a clickable button?
Okay. So in short, each of my I use a module called Elm UI, and so you don't need CSS and you don't need any like HTML elements at all. I can add classes. So the default Elm view actually uses an HTML elements. I use Elm UI elements, which there's a whole video on why you should do that. But when I create an element, this is where my styling goes. This is a function, right? I have this is a function, right? So it's styling and functionality. That's what happens on click. But my function can return different things based on the current state, right, of the model. So it's always looking at the model. So in this case, I have I created the UI status of my model. I'm either viewing my addresses, adding new addresses, or editing an address. And they have slightly different behaviors. But the one thing I can tell you about my dive into Elm is once you start working with Elm and you get it, and it doesn't take long, you will not want to. JavaScript seems barbaric. Frameworks seem barbaric. I guarantee you spend 4 hours getting to know Elm, you'll be converted. And if you have questions, contact me.
For example, if I have to make some CSS fix, which is like in your language, you're incorporating that inside this frame, like not framework, but whatever that is. So how do you debug that? Does it show up in the browser the way CSS shows up? For example, spacing 25, will it show up as the regular property or something else?
It will show up as a style in the browser. Yeah. So, but you can add CSS classes to this. I just don't. And even if you're using Elm UI, like I use, you can still use classes, CSS classes. You can use all that. After a while working with Elm UI, you won't want to. You'll think CSS is for losers.
Is there a way to prevent any update of the UI or the DOM? Like, let's say you're optimistically updating your your state by
Yes.
adding an address. We don't know if we return back like if it's successful or not. In what order does it go in?
So don't worry about the order, because I'm going to manage all of that in my model. So when I do my update, let's say I send it off and I want like to gray it out until, I get Magento telling me that it's updated it. I sent my message off to Magento. When Magento's done doing its thing, and let's say it's going through a service worker because I don't have a current connection, that whole damn thing takes a while, right? As after the server gets back to me, I take an incoming message and I tell it what to do with that message. So that message then updates my state, which says this is no longer pending. So my function in my styling can change it. Just like you saw where the save address button changed color, right? Same type of thing. Until everything was ready, it's just a function as to what happens with it, the way it's displayed. And it forces you to put everything in state. There are no side effects. You don't have conflicts, right? It all runs together. And this is running, my demo is running on Magento, which has Knockout and React and jQuery and all this other stuff that I don't need with Elm, but it's perfectly happy to coexist with it. So if you start an Elm project, think of one component that you want to take over, that you want to improve. And that's kind of how that's how most Elm projects start. They start with one component, eventually they take over the whole application.
A lot of the addresses you had there were all hard-coded, like attributes, things like that. How does it start bringing into the dynamic nature of Magento with custom attributes or additional customizations, things like that?
Custom attributes like, how does it communicate with Magento to pull in?
How do you include a custom attribute? Like I add, store ID number or something like that to an address. I don't know. But
right, you want
custom
to
attribute. Like how does the model
a location name or something?
How does the model that's hard coded there take those custom attributes into account?
So it's not hard coded. I import it as a dict, so I can talk to you about that later. Thanks. Thanks very much. Hopefully I was loud enough.